morning, everyone. We are reconvening the Del Mar College Board of Regents workshop session at 9 a.m. on Friday, May 29th. This is a continuation of yesterday's workshop meeting, so we will not do our normal opening ceremonies practices. We do have on video with us Regent Sherwood, Regent Averett, and Regent Hutchison. In the room, we have Regent Salinas, Regent Adami, Regent Estrada, and Regent Bennett, and myself. We are expecting Regent Rivas to join us by teleconference as well. And so we're checking with him to make sure that he has the connections and is able to join us hopefully shortly. So we went through all of the protocols and disclaimers and everything yesterday. Since this is a continuation of that meeting, I'm going to jump right into it. And welcome again, Dr. Bill Holda. Thank you for facilitating and the training yesterday. And we look forward to this morning's work as well.
Great. So this morning, just to give a global heads up, we're going to ask the board to really dive in from 9 to 10:30 and to really take the lead. I'm going to be here and I will help facilitate if an issue comes up or a question or if I see an insight, but for the most part, this right now is in the board's realm to do the planning for this next year, focusing on the board's plan, and Chair Regent Scott can review the domains or the areas that you sort of agreed on yesterday. We'll take a break at 10:30, and then at 10:45, we will go into the session on board CEO relationship and do that for an hour till 11:45. And then at 11:45, I have some evaluation forms that ACCT requests that you complete so that we can always evaluate our effectiveness, both individually and as an association, in delivering something that's useful to you. So that's the overall schedule today. And I think at this point, I'm going to defer to the chair and let her review the areas that the board seemed to agree on yesterday were areas to focus on this morning. And then I think the thing to stay conscious of as you go through this morning is, so we agreed on this issue. Now the question is, what are actions, calendar dates, strategies, things that we could focus on so that we know we have legs on this plan and it's not just an idea, but talk about some of the strategies for implementation once we get into the process itself. Okay? Okay, Carol, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And bail me out if I need help. If they get pretty rambunctious on me, I might need your facilitation skills. So just as an FYI for the board, what I use a couple of different tools as we go through these board meetings, and I am constantly taking notes from our meetings on requests that I hear and things that I think we want to do moving forward. What I did last night with our action plans was to pull up, to try to combine those in terms of the big picture items. It doesn't capture everything that we've talked about. And so after we talk about the action plans, good morning, Regent Rivas. Glad you're
Good morning, everybody. Sorry I couldn't be with you today.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through the big action plans, and then we'll go through kind of my list of items. As Bill referred yesterday, there were a number of items that might need clarification or we might need quick action on that don't constitute a full-fledged board action plan for the coming year. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Let's see if I can make that happen. Do I have that option, Jessica? I'm the presenter. Yes. There we go. Okay. Love it when a plan comes together. So these are the notes that I was able to pull together and draft for the board for our action plan for the upcoming year. So we want to continue to set up our process for regular policy review. As we all agreed, that was a priority last year, and we suspended that while staff was doing some work to organize the policy manual. So we want to bring that back. We do want to make sure, though, that in that process of creating a regular policy review, our first item is going to be to review the board operational documents. And so what I anticipate doing is in the next couple of months, or even in the next month, is to appoint an ad hoc committee to look at that item kind of out of sequence. And then that would give the board an opportunity to review those and to make any changes that we want to make going forward. So that could include any number of issues around what's in our bylaws and again, those official board documents around board organization, around the ethics issues, our code of ethics, and other kinds of operational things. So that would happen quickly. There was a suggestion that we consider that decision-making matrix that Dr. Holda shared with us. That would provide some clarification for the board. So that's an example of something that could be part of the bigger policy review. I don't think that's going to be a quick item, but that could be part of the bigger policy review. Does that capture what we want to do on those two items from a big picture standpoint? Again, it's not every nitty gritty thing that we talked about, but those could come in. For example, I'll give you an example. To appoint an ad hoc committee, that committee's first job might be to ask individual board members, what changes do you want to see? What are you interested in revising, or are you okay with where they are? That could be one of their first tasks, and based on the consensus from that feedback, they know what the board wants to look at, so that they're not looking at everything if the board doesn't feel like we need to look at everything. So there will be an opportunity to provide input. Does this capture what we talked about yesterday with the policy review? Any questions or comments on that piece? I'm not seeing any unmutes or any waving of hands, so I'm going to assume silence is consensus, or I can live with that, as Dr. Holda told us yesterday. The second item was to review our board meeting practices for efficiency and effectiveness, to possibly include the structure of our agenda, the documents that are included in our board agenda and how we receive reports, and then a calendar for board workshops on strategic issues. Does that seem to capture what we talked about yesterday? Regent Bennett, do you have a question? I'm just trying to read my...
I am, and I'm trying to correlate that to our online board resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I see some of these, like, they weren't updated subsequent to 2013. So I'm wondering if maybe we can make this current with whatever we're doing here.
So I know that I appreciate that, and I've actually looked at that resource before. So board effect, so that would be one of those notes that I'll make a note of right now. It probably doesn't need to be in our action plan, but it would be a note to update board effect with current documents. I know that the website has the most current versions of all of our policies and procedures. So under the Board of Regents page, there is a section on the website for policies and procedures, and that is the section that is updated. But as a part of what Ms. McDonald is doing with our policy review, and then what staff can do in terms of support, I think it's a good idea to make sure that board effect is current. Okay. Under number 2, are there any questions or concerns? Again, I see that as potentially an executive committee function to create some recommendations on those board meeting practices, and then to come back with some suggestions in potentially June, July, August timeframe, and give you all some suggestions on and working with staff on how to best potentially change and alter our board meeting practices. Looking around the room and looking at mics, and yes, sir. Gabe, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, Carol, as far as the structure of the agenda, our policy has something in there dealing with the agenda Would that have to be changed in the policy?
So I think that's what the executive committee would need to review. If we change the order of the agenda and the structure of the agenda, then what corresponding policies would have to be updated accordingly. So for example, we just adopted a new public comment policy. So
Yeah.
we would need to make sure that any changes we have either comply with that updated public comment policy or make revisions to the public comment policy.
So it would still require board action?
Potentially,
The
yes.
the recommendation? Okay.
Yes. Okay. Any other
Thank you.
questions or comments on that item?
Carol, I might suggest also that the board, in that review of the bylaws, excuse me, take a look at what is in there that doesn't need to be in there. Because changing the bylaws is a much more difficult process, a lot of times involving 1 or 2 readings, a certain percentage of the board voting for them. And so if there are certain things that fall more into practices than policies, the board may want to try to identify those going through that process and extract those so that in the future, something like the agenda order of a meeting might not rise to the level of bylaws. That's just a thought as we're talking.
So I've added in that to review bylaws for update and possible streamlining. So on number 3, we had talked about in several instances the COVID-19 response. And so I tried to encapsulate that by saying continued discussion on COVID-19 response for analysis on impact to the college and to update policies, resources, and plans related to crisis response. Much of that falls into the purview of the president and CEO, but in that review, are there things that we want to make sure he has the flexibility to do in the event of a future crisis, or are there reporting mechanisms that he can act the way he or she needs to act, but the board is informed, and that possibly could come in that decision-making matrix. So I think just reviewing that and making sure that he has, and that we have the policies and resources and practices in place for an adequate response. Does that capture what we talked about yesterday? Any concerns there? Okay. And then item number 4 was continued monitoring of the college's strategic plan with emphasis on understanding the data related to key performance indicators. I think our conversation yesterday involved a lot around the board expectations and understanding and ability to absorb the data surrounding those KPIs. So 1, we would encourage Regents to participate in state and national professional development related to student success data and other community college performance indicators, as we did last year, to give us some topics to consider when we go to those state and national conferences, and to look for opportunities to learn more. And then to update materials for the onboarding of our new Regents with resources for understanding community college performance measures. I think that might be a piece where we could update that onboarding curriculum. That was an add-on that I created last night, but there were a couple places where there were some suggestions around the onboarding of new Regents, and this was one that I added to the list, hoping that y'all would agree that that might be a way that we can start potential new Regents with good college performance understanding. Any questions or concerns about item number 4? What on the list are we missing? And again, I'm going to create my smaller item to-do list, different from what would be the adopted board action plans for the year. I'll move this back down so you can see it all. Questions, concerns, input, nodding of heads. Okay, well, we're not going to take action on this today. I'll continue to refine it a little bit. You will see it as a discussion and action item at our June agenda. So just to give you a sense of the items that I'm including in my running to-do list. adding to the orientation, how to deal with vendors and contractors at the college. That was a question that came up. And so I think that's probably one of those early discussions with onboarding of new regents that we should cover. We want to make sure that any conflict of interest disclosure forms are published. And so what is the process? We're just going to double check that and determine where those could potentially be and where they're supposed to be, so that if there are any that are submitted, we know where those are and the public knows where those are. Yes, sir.
Talking about vendors, what's the procedure that, they have to fill out forms or what? How do they get into the vendors list?
There are any number of ways, and it's a pretty comprehensive vendor list that we have. So if it is an item, toilet paper, or computer jump drives, or laptop computers, it's typically a bid list, and we use the Texas TASB. There are a number of sources that we use.
There's a number of co-ops and so forth. Yeah, we have
to find best price.
Yes, ma'am. The short answer is Regent Salinas is just asking to call me, give him my number. I'll take care of it from there.
And that there's bigger picture, there's bigger issues, and we'll send out a request for proposal or a request for qualifications depending on the applicable state law for some of the bigger projects. But just everyday rank and file vendors, then it's a fairly straightforward process.
There was a time that we were working with the Education Service Center to order supplies. Are we still doing that, Dr. Simeon?
I don't know specifically with the with the ESC. That one does not ring a bell.
Because up until about 3 or 4 years ago, Gabe, do you remember that? Dr. Lamy, you remember?
I just don't know if it's current. I remember them being a partner.
Oh,
and so
okay.
forth. Yes,
We
ma'am.
were
But
partners.
I just don't know if it's current. We've had different, many different vendors. We have different contracts through, or access points through the state, the DIR. We have A&M. We have all sorts. And so that's a very, very complex system of outlets for purchasing or services.
Thank you.
So regarding the committee structure, what I'm going to recommend to the board is, because our bylaws have a number of committees and the board has had discussion every biennium as it reorganizes itself, that become a process in the November, January, after the November election, but the December, January timeframe after the board reorganizes and determines what committee structures it wants. So if the board at that time decides it wants to have a robust committee structure, that's a decision of the board. If we want to have 1 or 2 ad hoc committees or 1 or 2 standing committees and then ad hoc is necessary, that would be a decision of the board. Given that we are within a few months of an election and board reorganization, it would make sense to me to have that committee discussion be a part of that ongoing. And we don't have any pending. We've already received our financial audit for the year. So some of those are the board practices. So that makes sense unless the board chooses otherwise. Do you want to go ahead and redo our committee structure at this point in time, with the understanding that by, again, December, January timeframe, you'll be reorganizing the board anyway, or we will be reorganizing the board? Any concerns about that? Okay. My other notes were all around some detail on our review of board documents. And so, and I'm just looking to see if there were other to-dos. Oh, specifically related to the calendaring of board workshops on strategic issues. I am going to work with Dr. Escamilla and look at our existing board calendar through the end of the year, and look at which ones and the sequencing of those on items that he knows are coming up and items that he wants to make sure we cover and have board background on. Given our limited in-person involvement at this point in time, until we're back fully comfortable with all 9 regents at the table, I want us to be cognizant of the fact that workshop sessions are somewhat difficult. I think this is work, but these are long days and long times to sit in front of a computer and to not have the actual in-person interaction. But I think that doesn't limit what Dr. Escamilla and his team can put forward for us on strategic issues. But I think I don't see us having one a month, but I do see us prioritizing those. And so give us a little bit of time to look through those strategic issues and come back to you with a calendar for what that will look like, and then what it would look like in the next biennium as well. Does that seem reasonable, Dr. Escamilla, that you and I could look at those issues? Okay. We know that there were several residential housing, for example. That's a report that he was going to bring back to us. We've had initial discussions on, and he was going to bring back to us anyway. So there are a number of these things that were already on our list of items to continue discussing. That was it. So y'all have other things you want to make sure are added to the list?
Carol, the only other thing I had,
Hang a second, Gabe, you're muted.
Okay, no, I'm saying that pretty much covers everything we talked about yesterday.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Holda?
well, I think the one thing I had put on my list was when the timing allows it, to try to schedule a meeting on the West Campus.
Yes.
It's a small thing, and it certainly didn't rise to the level of the big plan, but it was a little do list item, I thought.
I will begin working with, to prepare the technology and the arrangements for that. We have different venues now, different opportunities, so it'll be challenging but fun in the new spaces that we have over there.
Right.
Taking the ET expansion as an idea, so I'll start working on it.
Chairman Scott,
Yes.
I was gonna, say something a while ago about exactly what that West Campus. And I really would like for us to, I know we do a lot for them and, we provide all the resources they need. But I think looking at, situations that we have with our kids nowadays, hey, I think we need to also concentrate even more than what we're doing because, the plumbers, all those people, electricians, I mean, wow, we need them real bad right now. And just like the nurses, but the fact is that I think that West Campus will really provide big for us, for the kids in our area.
Thank you, sir.
And the other note that I had was the suggestion that on occasion, not frequently, but just occasionally, that a regent could go to lunch with Dr. Escamilla and just have a conversation.
We'll get restarted with that. Absolutely.
This is Libby. I just want to mention that in the year that I've been here, I have found Dr. Escamilla to be very accessible, and I have never felt reluctant to reach out and ask him to go to lunch or meet if I felt like that I needed to do that. So I definitely think he's made that invitation to us, maybe not overtly, but I think he definitely has an open door with us.
I will tell you that during this COVID response, I expect my 4:30 or 5 o'clock call from him a couple of times a week on a regular basis as he's updated me on various crisis situations, and we determine, how to get that information to the rest of the board. So that is, I will tell you, he texts and answers his phone and calls you back very quickly as Regent. So you're right, he is very accessible.
Carol, the other note I had was, and it would probably be just a part of the policy review process, so it doesn't necessarily need a separate bullet, would be to consider the merits, pro or con, of creating a chair job description. And if that is not something the board wants to do, I'm fine with that also. But it was just another little piece of fruit hanging on my tree here.
Right. So there were several things in kind of my my policy list when we get to that point of the board having that workshop discussion on policies that we want to include. And these were just on my personal list. So for example, I think all regents going forward should have a delmar.edu email address. And we should transition to that as soon as possible for records retention purposes, for open records and open meetings requests. So that was going to be a policy, for example, that I suggested to the board. That was, there's issues related to each of us owning our own email address. Some of us have delmar.edu. We still could receive and respond to our own emails, but having something that the college then can make sure that we're in compliance with records retention, I think makes sense. So I think there's several ideas like that when we get to the point of policy review and have that workshop. What policies do we want to have included? So I've made note of that one if the board chooses to want to go forward with a board chair job description. There's stuff in our bylaws around the duties, but it's a pretty generic preside at the meetings, authorized to sign on behalf of the Board of Regents, et cetera. Yes.
Madam Chair, there's new law coming around surrounding cybersecurity and training and those things, compliance issues that are going to tighten up. They're squeezing us all. In fact, I have to probably do some this weekend, some training this weekend to catch up with the team. And so I expect that it'll be required of the regents as well. I'll find that version of it. Jessica, am I accurate about TAC 202 training for regents as well? Right, it's coming, and so it's a bigger and bigger issue. And you know, I guess the simplest example, or a simple example, is that not having a delmar.edu email, but it's coming. So there's more compliance, and it is just getting to be a bit onerous, but it's necessary because of the cybersecurity threats that are out there. So it's a critical matter. It's growing and growing.
Mark, I would add too, there have been some changes, not recently, but regarding open records as it relates to cell phones, text messages, not just emails that go back and forth. So it might be timely too, as part of this process, to have Augie check on those updates and brief the board so that everybody knows what the expectations are. I know even before I retired, that was a moving target, and we used to provide cell phones for some of our employees, and they were college paid the bill, but we used them for personal use also. And so basically, attorney checked it out and said, in that situation, that cell phone is subject to disclosure, including your private stuff. So we pretty quickly got rid of all college-owned cell phones and went completely private. But those are just examples of how some of that arena is changing. And Mark is correct, the expectations for public entities is getting much tighter and much stricter.
So I think that's one of those areas where when we do the policy review, that there's going to be several factors that go into our board policy potentially
Yes.
on electronic communications and
Yes.
what are the parameters in which the college wants to hold the regents that comply with state law. So
And the other thought I had, Carol, was that policy review is such a big umbrella. And so, and I think you cited this yesterday, we can do this in sequences and different bits and pieces, but I sort of envision this being much like you did the strategic planning process, where it took you almost a full year or more to be involved, to develop that and get to where you could finally approve it. So I do think you're looking at a major project.
well, we're actually talking longer than that. We're talking about creating the process by which the board, at least every 4 years, 5 years, there's some cycle at which the
Yes.
board is looking at different portions of
Yes.
policy on a regular basis. And we can always pull something up out of sequence if there becomes an update that's required or there's an issue that comes out of that. Dr. Sherwood has a comment. Her mic is open.
Yeah, when we looked at the structure of the board meeting of the agenda, one of the things that we talked about, aside from that workshops on strategic issues, was to mention, some sort of student success data at every meeting. I just wanted to make sure that got into the notes,
Thank you.
whether that's, whether it's a good report or we were trying this and we're not seeing results or whatever it is. But I thought that was a good suggestion yesterday.
Thank you. I'll include that. Yeah, I actually have my running notes from yesterday, and then I tried to compile some of them last night in addition to my homework, in addition to doing this. So at some point I gave up and ate dinner and drank a glass of wine and went to bed.
Miss Carol, is there any way we could make that a board goal? Something like, just state that the board will review or analyze data for, I guess, for who finished in success or.
So that's what-
I'm not sure that I want to word it like that, but.
That's what I was trying to capture in number 4 here. And you'll see that the first bullet point so continue monitoring the strategic plan with emphasis on understanding the data related to key performance indicators. So much of our strategic plan is related around student success and student completion. So I didn't call it out separately, but I did refer to that was, I guess, the point of that. Do we need to be more specific and more intentional with the language there?
I was just thinking of maybe a goal for the board, something that has to do with reviewing data for successful practices.
So let me make a suggestion, Elva, if I might, and that is, so number 4 says we're going to continue monitoring of this college's strategic plan with an emphasis on understanding the data related to key performance indicators. So a strategy for that might be to have, as Mary just talked about, a student success report at every board meeting. So I don't know that you need to set it, quote, as a goal, but it could be a strategy to achieve that overall continuous monitoring. I hear what you're saying. I think that some of the things that you talked about yesterday are appropriate strategies for accomplishing that review. So it's up to the board. I don't know that it needs to be a separate goal. I think, in my opinion, Carol has captured it, and she can add a bullet if she wants to that.
But as a strategy, it's
Yes.
difficult. Okay.
That's just a thought.
Well, so these other two sub bullets are strategies to encourage Regents to do professional development and to make sure that we are updating our materials for onboarding for college performance indicators. So I'm okay with putting it in there as a regular update to the board related to student success metrics and strategies. Any other notes or revisions? And I'll work to clean this up and create both the kind of action item list and try to communicate that to you all between now and the June meeting. So if there are things that you individually recall or want us to make sure that we include, you can provide that individual feedback as well. All right, well, we were much more efficient than you anticipated. We did
That's
this
true.
in 30 minutes.
I think what would be helpful, Carol, is I think you have some thoughts on what the next steps would be that relate to these. And I think you and I, even in a number of the conversations we've had in the weeks preparing for this. So I think it would be helpful if you would just take a minute or two to share with the board what you envisioned to be like the very next 2 or 3 steps for implementing this plan.
So similar to what we did last year, after the board takes official action on these in June, then I will begin to work with Dr. Villarreal and Dr. Escamilla to make sure the resources are in place for the board to accomplish these. So, we don't go out and do a lot of work between meetings we don't do tactical work. We do our board work and we do our community work, but we don't do a lot of tactical work between board meetings. So I'll work with, for example, I'll review the structure of our meeting practices. The executive committee will do some work over the next month or two to develop some ideas and on what that new board agenda might look like. We'll run it through TRAPS with Augie and make sure we've got policy and everything in place. And then we'll roll it out probably a little bit at a time. I don't know that we'll do one big update, but for example, we could immediately start with regular reports on student success without even changing the structure of the agenda. That can be part of a regular staff report. So there's 3 or 4 things that can happen very quickly. There's some things that probably require a little bit more time. Updating the materials for onboarding of new regions. So that's something that we don't anticipate any region openings between now and November, but we do want to have those materials updated by November so that if new regions are elected, then we have an opportunity to, the board has an opportunity to onboard them with some, again, some thoughtfulness and intention. So those are the kinds of things that we'll see over time.
And Mark, my question to you is, so were you making lists yesterday, or your staff that were watching? Because there were so many strategic ideas that were floated out, such as setting time limits for certain sections of the meeting, for trying to work with the board to set some limits on certain reports, getting some of those out to the board in a much earlier fashion rather than 3 days before the meeting. So I just was checking because I know there was a lot coming out of ideas from different board members and a lot of conversation.
Short answer is yes. I have at least 4 sets of eyes and ears taking notes, including myself.
Good.
So I'll go back to one of your opening slides yesterday where you talk about balance and rhythm. And so I'm very cognizant of all of the things that staff has going on right now. And the potential for a board to overwhelm staff with new ideas is great in any organization like this. And so I always like to make sure that individual ideas are great. Does the board have consensus on those individual ideas? And so that's why I really kind of pull back to, are we in agreement? Because again, individual board members can come to Dr. Escamilla and he'll have 90 ideas in a week of things that he should do. And if we're not careful, we can overwhelm them, especially in a time like this. So that's why I'm really cognizant on individual ideas need to come to the board. And if the board agrees that that's something we want to pursue, then we move on. That doesn't mean you can't have a conversation with Dr. Escamilla and he can't answer questions and you can feed him something, but the expectation that your individual idea is going to immediately result in some sort of staff action, I think is a dangerous precedent to set. So that's why I want to balance that. I want to make, I think part of my job as chair of the board is to help provide that balance and that conduit of information to our president. So I just want to be cognizant of that.
Good point. So,
because there's no shortage of good ideas.
No.
There is no shortage of good ideas. The ability to get them all done is where there's the resources and bandwidth to get them all done is.
So my question for you as the board right now is, do you want to continue this discussion, or is there anything else that needs to be discussed? And would you want to take a short break and then segue into board CEO relationship? I'm looking for a little guidance here so I can facilitate properly.
I don't think anybody is opposed to moving on with the next part of the agenda and potentially finishing sooner. I don't think that would be an objection we're always okay if we're more efficient and we get finished a little bit sooner. So that would be okay.
I do want to compliment you all for not just the thorough self-evaluation that had a lot of rich verbiage and ideas in it, but also the way you've approached the strategic planning process. And I think this approach of the big four items is much more manageable. And it allows you to, and they're big items. So I think you've got a very full plan, and it will be interesting to see the progress report a year from now.
Good. Okay, well, with that, the board is going to go back into closed session under Texas Government Code 551.071 regarding pending and contemplated litigation or settlement offer and possible discussion and action in open session and the seeking of legal advice from counsel on pending legal or contemplated matters or claims with a possible discussion and action in open session, and under Texas Government Code 551.074A1 regarding the employment evaluation, reassignment, duties, discipline, or dismissal of public officer or employee, including annual evaluation of the college president and annual board self-evaluation. The time is 9:41 a.m. We'll take a brief break to clear the room and adjust all of our technology. I'm sorry, the on-air sign is on. Are we good? All right, thank you. We have come out of closed session at 12:05 p.m. with no action coming out of closed session. We do have one calendar update, Dr. Escamilla.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to remind everybody and for everybody listening out there that tonight is our first ever, maybe our last, we don't know, but our first ever virtual graduation occurring at 7 p.m. tonight. You can join it by way of Facebook, YouTube. You can just look up Del Mar College on those two and you'll have the virtual graduation. It is, and there's one other link that's on the social media sites. So if you just go to your social media site and look up Del Mar College, it'll have all the details of the 3 possible links. I apologize, there's a specific link that I cannot recall right now.
YouTube, I think.
With YouTube, I mentioned YouTube and Facebook.
Okay.
There's one more link out there that's one I'm not familiar with, but that may be it. That may Ustream may be it. So it nevertheless, it's all located on the website, delmar.edu and so forth. So please participate. Get your popcorn, get comfortable. It's going to be a great show, I hear. I'm looking forward to it. It's a very momentous opportunity to celebrate the essence of why we're here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And with that, our meeting is adjourned at 12:07 p.m. Thank you.